Welcome to the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig. William, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, all that other good stuff. How are you?
I'm doing well, and same to you. Merry Christmas.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, last year we did an analysis of It's a Wonderful Life for Christmas, my favorite Christmas movie. And this year we thought we'd do another couple of Christmas movies. I picked my second favorite Christmas movie, Miracle on 34th Street, and also, one of the hotly debated whether it's a Christmas movie, your pick, Die Hard. So looking forward to getting into both of those.
Yes, these are two great movies, and I think we both are going to have a lot of insights into them.
So I first saw Miracle on 34th Street back in the 70s, I think when I still believed in Santa Claus, or at least partially. Growing up as a Jewish kid, you always knew something was going on, or that Santa still had my parents' handwriting. So there were phases of coming to understand, but it didn't really shake my belief in Santa, is what I remember. And that's, I think, what they were trying to do as a movie, that was coming out in those days. Had you seen the movie? When was
Yes, I saw the movie as a kid, and I've seen it a few times since then, and I recently rewatched it for this podcast.
Sure. Okay. And so for those of you that haven't seen it, basically there's this Santa that shows up at Macy's, where the original guy they have playing Santa is he gets drunk, and so this Santa has to fill in for him. He does such a great job that they hire him to be the store Santa. And this is all occurring, post World War II. The movie, I think, is from 1947. And when Santa comes to work at Macy's, they first try to get him to push overstocked toys on undecided children. Now, this Santa is upset about how they commercialize Christmas, as he says, and he's talking about that we need to get back to what Christmas is about. And we can talk about, the implications for Ayn Rand and objectivism. But what really I think is one of the most fascinating themes is that Santa starts meeting the kids. He starts sending parents to other stores with his seeming encyclopedic knowledge of what toys are at what toy stores. This is all pre-internet, and he's got he says he keeps track of the toy market pretty closely, as you'd probably imagine. And he also goes on to say that making the child happy is the only thing that matters, no matter where they get the toy, which is a type of putting happiness first, rational self-interest, benevolence. And then the management overhears him sending kids to Gimbals, their main competitor, or other stores. But before they can get angry, they start hearing customers love it and now swear they're going to become regular customers. And I have a clip of that.
Now to continue, gentlemen. I admit that on the face of it, this plan sounds idiotic and impossible. Imagine Macy's Santa Claus sending customers to Gimbals. Oh, but gentlemen, you cannot argue with success. Look at this. Telegrams, messages, telephone calls, the governor's wife, the mayor's wife. Over 500 thankful parents expressing undying gratitude to Macy's. Never in my entire career have I seen such a tremendous and immediate response to a merchandising policy.
So, they're really, it's almost like the birth of customer service, where they're starting to see that there's something to be said for benevolence, and there's something more than just the short-term bottom line.
Right. I think earlier you mentioned something about this relating to Ayn Rand's idea of Christmas, and of course, objectivists would highlight the commercial aspect or the trading aspect. Christmas is a celebration of shopping and giving gifts and things like that. But in this case, there's a sort of integration going on in the movie between the spirit of Christmas and the commercialization aspect of it or the marketing aspect of it, Macy's is discovering that if they treat their customers with goodwill and helpfulness, guiding them in their shopping and sending them to a store that has the gift they're looking for, that this will benefit Macy's, because then the customer will develop a positive view of Macy's customer service.
Exactly. And they were seeing that in the people that took the time to write telegrams. Here's the rest of the clip.
Positive, Frank, that if we expand our policy, we'll expand our results as well. Therefore, from now on, not only will our Santa Claus continue in this manner, but I want every salesperson in this store to do precisely the same thing. If we haven't got exactly what the customer wants, we'll send him where he can get it. No high pressuring and forcing a customer to take something he doesn't really want.
But after all,
we'll be known as the helpful store, the friendly store, the store with a heart, the store that places public service ahead of profits. And consequently, we'll make more profits than ever before.
So, that's ultimately, he's talking about rational self-interest, that by being seen as the, company that puts people ahead of profits, they'll make more profits than ever before.
Yeah, and it sounds ironic or perhaps like a conflict or a contradiction. But what I think the movie's trying to do here is find some way to integrate both of these aspects of Christmas. And so he makes the joke, we're going to send them elsewhere. We're going to put public service over profits, but then that's going to help us make more profits. So
Right.
it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek nod to the purpose of business, which is to make profits, but then also the purpose of just being a good person, which is to have goodwill and help people.
Now, I do think, this is actually very positive. I couldn't help but think about, the stuff with John Mackey of Whole Foods, and he debated Yaron about whether the purpose of businesses is to, just make profit. And one of the things that came up was that Mackey, as CEO of Whole Foods, was saying that, his customers wanted him to adopt these kind of progressive attitudes. And so while, yes, it's good to be shown as benevolent and wanting to do the right thing, you do have to draw the line at serving as an agent of your own destruction.
Yeah, you can't just do everything the customer wants. It has to be in your interest. So if the customer comes up with a good suggestion, then sure, you take the suggestion and implement it. But I think that in the long run, the business still needs to serve its own interests and serve its own investors and things like that. But I think what this movie is getting at is that there is some benefit in just helping your customer get what they need, especially during the Christmas season when everyone's frantically shopping around for toys and things. So right. If Macy's doesn't have that particular toy at that particular moment, and they can't get it the next day for the customer, then they got to send them somewhere else. And that'll show that they're really interested in helping the customer.
Exactly. They then show a scene of more salespeople adopting Chris's policy of sending customers to other stores. And then they flash over to Gimbal, who decides he wants to make it his own policy as well.
And why didn't one of you think of this idea? It's the greatest goodwill policy I ever heard of. Every shopper in New York City suddenly thinks of Macy as a benevolent soul, thinking only of the welfare of the public. And what does that make Gimbal? Nothing but a profiteering money grubber. Well, two can play at this game. From now on, if we haven't got what the customer wants, send him back to Macy's. And what's more, we'll do the same thing in our stores in Philadelphia, Milwaukee, and Pittsburgh. Now get to work on it right away.
So, Gimbal's doing it in Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Milwaukee, eh?
Yes, and very successfully.
Well, we can cover the country, too. Notify our stores in San Francisco, Atlanta, Toledo, and Newark to get going right away.
All right, all right.
Mr. Macy.
So now there is a competition for spreading goodwill and cheer and helping customers find things at other stores.
That's right. My understanding is that that's sort of what happened with Andrew Carnegie and Rockefeller. They competed their whole lives, and when they started being philanthropic, they were still competing in who could be the biggest giver. And so, or give the best quality content. So that's a good thing. I love the fact that he starts off by blaming his own team for not bringing him the idea first. And he's like,
Right.
and then he's still indignant about them painting about Macy being painted as benevolent.
Yeah.
What does that make me, a money grubber? He's still reacting to that kind of portrayal of capitalists that existed. I mean, Ayn Rand is already writing Atlas Shrugged by this time.
Yeah, I know. I wonder if she influenced the screenwriter here, because it does sound a little bit like a Randian influence there when they're talking about, you know, finding ways to make profits through helping people and things like that. Because they're still not just dumping on profits. It's still about making profits in the end. So I think that in general, the movie is not anti-capitalist. I think it's kind of either neutral or against the so-called greedy capitalist types.
Well,
And that's about as far as it goes in that direction.
I don't even necessarily think it's when they talk about commercialization. I mean, they're saying that they want to get back to the spirit of Christmas. I think it's interesting because they talk about that and they talk about faith, but they never mention Jesus in the movie or anything religious. So, and what's interesting is the other storyline is that the daughter of the Macy's worker, is her mother taught her common sense from an early age, and this Santa's trying to teach her imagination. And it really, the main thing is because he thinks he's the real Santa. And so they end up putting him on trial, and there's talk of, having faith. And so, he's talking, but when the lawyer for Santa's talking about Doris having faith in him, and that, and they define faith as believing when common sense says not to. That's different than, blind faith or faith in something that there's absolutely no evidence for. But, sometimes it's like, you don't know whether or not you're going to be successful, and you have to have a little bit of faith in yourself to keep going.
Perhaps, I mean, that's one interpretation. If there is something to criticize in this movie, I think it is their view of faith and the definition you gave, because that's a line in the movie.
Right.
It's faith is believing in things when common sense tells you not to. And that, of course, sounds like Ayn Rand's definition of faith. That's what she argued against, is that you should value reason over faith.
Right. But I think one of the themes of the movie was that you can have this kind of atomistic common sense, and, that there is a place for the imagination and creativity. This is my view of it. I try to take a more benevolent view. And the fact that they're not bringing up a lot of religious things, I think it's in terms of common sense, it's not when, rationality is, but sometimes you've got to keep trudging ahead. Your own the other day was talking about when is the time for a revolution, and his basic answer is you've got to be able to win. Well, you don't always know if you can win when you get started. So, whether you call it faith or belief in yourself or belief in your cause, or, it's worth fighting for, even if we don't win, that all of that matters. And some people call it faith, but I don't think it's the same faith as just, totally going against reality. I don't think the characters in that were advocating it.
Yeah, I think the movie tries to draw a thin line between this view of faith in believing in yourself and confidence versus faith in what you think is impossible or not doesn't make sense. So on one hand, you have this story set during Christmas time, and in the context of a man believing he's Santa Claus, and so that's faith in something where common sense tells you it's ridiculous. And then on the other hand, you have this love story and between Doris Walker and Frederick Gailey. I think that's kind of one of the core stories in the movie as well. And you also have a kind of fantasy aspect or a wish that the daughter has for a house. For Christmas, she wants a house. And that's kind of Santa's like, well, I don't know. It's a tall order to fulfill. He doesn't know if he can get her a house. And since the movie doesn't actually portray any real miracles, even though it's called A Miracle on 34th Street, it's very secularized. And this Santa, it's always a question whether he's really supernatural or if he's just a crazy old man trying to help people. And in the way he gets the house for Susan is by like going around looking for a house that looks like the one she wants, and then giving instructions to the mother and her boyfriend Gailey, and then telling them which streets to take and which traffic areas to avoid in order to direct them right past that house. So he doesn't pull off some miracle. He actually does practical things in reality to try to make this happen. And so I think that's really the core of the story here, is that it's a Christmas story that doesn't involve miracles. It's actually replacing the old type of miracles, turning water into wine and all that stuff, with new sorts of fantastic things that can happen if you put your mind to it.
Yeah. I mean, the miracle of America.
Yeah. And the Miracle on 34th Street, of course, is just Kris Kringle's influence on Macy and how he changes the business environment in New York.
Yeah. They allude to things like she asks him for dinner on Christmas Eve after he's exonerated, and he's like, oh, I can't, it's Christmas Eve.
Right. And so there's always this hint that he might be the supernatural Santa, but you never actually see that happen.
Right.
Like, so it's possible that he's just studying where all the toys are in the city at every moment. He just happens to know all that information. And he just happens to speak Dutch when that Dutch girl comes and asks for something on Santa's lap. There's all these like weird things that happen, but in reality, it could possibly happen. It's not a full-on miracle.
Yeah. No, it's good stuff. I mean, you can see why it's one of my favorites of all time.
Yeah. Another interesting theme that I detected was the idea of replacing things. So in the very beginning, of course, the drunk Santa has to be replaced by Kris Kringle. And then you get this radical change in the policy at Macy's. So they're replacing this commercialized view of their policy with, or maybe a more focused idea of like keeping people at Macy's, and they're changing that policy to, we'll send them elsewhere if we have to. And so you get a replacement of actual policy. And then of course, Susan needs a new dad because, Mrs. Walker's husband died, I guess. I don't remember exactly. They divorced. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. So Mrs. Walker needs a new love interest, basically. Needs to replace that. So there's this theme of replacement. And I thought, well, what does that have to do with Christmas? And I was thinking, well, maybe the whole movie is about replacing the miraculous view of Christmas and the religious view of it with this more secularized goodwill towards man aspect and helping other people. And it's not so much, they're replacing the idea of what a miracle is. So a miracle used to be something supernatural, but now it's really something fantastic that people can do. And maybe it's not exactly explainable, but it is within the realm of possibility.
Everything's explainable, even if we can't explain it right now. No, I think that, along what you were saying, part of it is that Santa was being rewarded for helping people find the best product at the best price. And that's just a basic kind of justice.
Right. Yeah, it's being honest, and there's a big theme of honesty, like Santa doesn't tell lies.
Right.
And so he's a very principled person. So I think justice falls into line with that, because justice is about honestly looking at reality and determining, what rewards or punishments someone deserves. Like in the beginning, Santa wants to literally cane the drunk Santa for being a bad representation of Santa. He's got his cane, and then in another scene, he actually hits the psychologist because the psychologist is full of crap.
Yeah, that that definitely he does have an issue with that cane, but luckily he left it in the house, so it should be okay.
Well, it gets him in trouble, right? It gets him thrown in jail. So, but that's part of justice, right? And there's an actual court case in the movie. So not only is hitting the psychologist with a cane seemingly justice, like personal justice, but then in the end, in court, he gets like civil justice.
Yeah, and even though the court may have a tint of corruption when you see the judge interacting with his political advisor, played by Fred Mertz, the same character that played Fred Mertz in I Love Lucy. But it just, even though they have all those machinations about, you better not go out there and say there's no Santa Claus, or else you'll have the labor unions up your back, kids won't hang their stockings, and you won't get reelected. But I mean, in the end, the judge is trying to do the right thing, and when he has a technicality to rule on, he rules for Santa.
Yeah, it's funny how that's another example of where they kind of like with the profits thing, where if you are send other people to other stores, that'll show your goodwill and then you'll make more profits. It's kind of like a similar instance in the court case where they need some other justification for doing the right thing, right? It needs to be economic collapse will happen if we say Santa doesn't exist, because then no one will want to buy our toys, and the stores won't make profit. Like there's always like a replacement motive or replacement reason for doing something, right? So that falls into line with the theme of replacement I was talking about as well.
Would you call it a great replacement theory?
I wouldn't go that far.
All right. Well, this was a good discussion. Let's switch gears. A little harsher Christmas movie, if you want to call it that. But Die Hard. This is again one that I saw as a kid. I was a teenager in '88 when it came out. I'm pretty sure I saw it like 6 times in the theater. I mean, I loved it that much.
Yeah, I've seen it. I don't even know how many times I've seen it. In the last few weeks, I've watched it like 3 times just preparing for this podcast. Okay. I actually one of the best Christmas movies ever.
It's got so many great one-liners.
Yeah, and its brilliance is almost disguised, I think, on purpose. One of the points I wanted to begin with is that I believe the whole movie is actually a code, and you're intended to look at the details and examine it, pick it apart, and try to figure out what the code is revealing. And to highlight this aspect of it, recall the scene where Hans Gruber is trying to get the code from Takagi.
Right.
Before that, they walk through this room filled with all the models of all the projects Takagi has done around the world. And Hans Gruber comments on the models, and he says that when he was young, he loved to make models because he loved all the details and getting everything right. And then later, after he kills Takagi, he's talking to Theo, but he's not facing Theo. He's facing the audience. And he says, "You can crack the code, right?" And so I took that scene as a message to the audience that this movie is a code and you need to pick it apart to figure out what it's all about.
Wow. All right. Well, so what did you find out?
So basically, I think the core of the story is about the birth of a savior, and which is also the core of Christmas. Christmas is about the birth of Jesus, who is the savior of mankind. And John McClane starts off as just a cop from New York visiting his wife in Los Angeles. And throughout the movie, he becomes the hero who saves everyone in the building. So it's at the core, that theme of becoming a savior, the birth of a savior, is essential to the plot. And then it's also relates to Jesus's story, because Jesus has a confrontation with the devil. And I think Hans Gruber is literally supposed to be a devil figure. And his name, Gruber, I looked this up because I also discovered that the names are very important in this movie. Gruber is German for from a pit, or coming from a pit or something. It related to miners. So I think Gruber is literally supposed to be a figure of the devil, a
Well,
person from a pit.
I think, I mean, Hans was just such a great villain. I remember just thinking at the time, and what you were talking about with the models, I think applies to the fact that he tried to plan every little bit of this heist down to the detail. And, if it hadn't been for McClane, he probably would have gotten away with it. He thwarted all of the, different law enforcement agencies otherwise that messed around with him. But I love that he used a bunch of like left-wing causes to hide his real motive of theft. I think that's so symbolic for what the left does now.
So the devil is a trickster, right? He's the trickster. And that's what Hans is. He's tricking the authorities into thinking this is a terrorist takeover, hostage situation, when really it's a robbery. And he uses the FBI to create the blackout in the end so that he can, open the vault in the end. So
Right.
he's a trickster. His last name means a person from a pit. I mean, he's got a kind of goatee-ish beard. He's got the black suit. He's got his minions around him. He's from Germany.
You talk about him
everything.
being a trickster when he runs into McClane and he starts doing that American accent. Oh,
Oh,
God,
yeah.
you're one of them.
That's another aspect of it. So that's the thing. The whole movie is a code. And if you start looking into the details and picking it apart, you'll find things like that, where his accent is just another trick. So I think the movie's so brilliantly written that if I were to watch it 5 more times, I'd find even more details that relate to the certain themes I've discovered.
That's how I am about, things like Godfather. It's just every time I watch it, I learn something new. And I did, I did pick up some new things. I watched Die Hard in preparation for this. He's like, he says his name, Bill Clay. And
He's got two names too. He's a trickster.
that's right. I love that there's so just when I use this line of Bruce Willis's when someone seems to get like a little red pilled, like, welcome to the party, pal.
Yeah. Yeah. So this relates to one of the other obvious themes, which is duality. If you recall, when the reporters and the media start getting involved in the story, there's this interview they're watching on TV with the author of a book. I think it was called Hostage, Terrorist, Hostage,
Right.
a study in duality.
Right.
So that kind of I didn't realize that until the recent viewings, and I noticed that they were harping on this idea of duality. So then I started thinking, well, that makes sense because it's about John McClane being like he's a cowboy figure to Hans, but he's a savior to his wife. And then Hans is this, he's trying to pretend to be a terrorist, but he's really a robber. So, and then if you go through the list of other characters, it's the same thing. You start noticing dualities. Even Ellis, the guy who was doing cocaine in the office and then later got killed by Hans, he's portrayed as, his name, Ellis, I believe means like a servant of God or something like that. I think it's taken from Elijah. So he's a sort of semi savior. He's like he's like a protector of Holly because he doesn't give Holly up to Hans, but he's also a betrayer because he gives John McClane up to Hans. So even Ellis has this duality within him. He's good in one regard, but evil in the other regard.
Yeah, he's also one of the most frightened at first, and then seemingly one of the most bravest when he decides he has to come in and start doing his greenmail speech. Another one of the best lines is, Hans, what am I, a method actor? Put away the gun. This is radio, not TV.
Right. Yeah. There's so many good lines in the movie.
Carl, after his brother is killed and he meets up with McClane, he's like, we're both professionals. This is personal.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't want to belabor the point. You could just look, people can watch the movie again, look for all these examples of duality. But I want to focus on McClane as a Christ figure, because I think this is one of the most obvious reveals in the movie. And there's several lines and actions that point to it. There are a couple lines in the beginning. Takagi, when he meets McClane, and Holly comes in the room, Takagi says, "We've been sticking him with spears," which is, of course, what happens, to Jesus on the cross. And then there's when McClane, at the ending, in the end, when Holly's being held hostage by Hans and John comes into the room, Holly doesn't say John, she says Jesus, kind of like she's overwhelmed with surprise, like, oh my God, So
it's really just about how rough he looks, but I see the double kind of
all of the almost all of the exclamations and even the curses involve Christ or Jesus or something like that. It's there's so many of them in the movie.
Okay.
And then John McClane actually prays to God when he's going to jump off the roof. He's like, please God, don't let me die. So it's like, there's so many examples. And then
don't forsake me.
Yeah, obviously his appearance is also like Jesus. He starts off the movie fully clothed, but then he starts taking off his clothes. He takes his shoes off, he takes his shirt off, and all he's got is this white undershirt. Movie, he becomes a bloody mess. they shoot the glass in the unfinished floor, so that he has to walk across glass and cut up his feet, and he gets shot in the shoulder. He's just a bloody mess, like Jesus was.
Yeah, I think that all is going on. I think the fact that the movie came out in the 80s, that she was an executive kind of makes his cop job seem menial at first. And Argyle even jokes that John hardly expected her to make it in California. But a guy like McClane isn't appreciated by society as much until there's a crisis. And you talk about symbolism at the end when she's having making that split-second decision. The way they save her is by letting that kind of Rolex watch go.
Yeah, there is a little bit of that aspect of it, where she's also becoming more and more like the wife figure. This falls into the duality aspect. She's a wife, but also a businesswoman. So I think they're trying to build her up as more of a motherly figure, I guess. She's got her children and she's worried about them, but the wife aspect needs to be built up as well. So she needs to kind of appreciate her husband a little, like, okay, recognize what he is, but he also has to become the savior. So once he becomes the savior, she's in awe, and she's like, Jesus, and now he's her hero, you know?
Yeah, I think that's definitely going on. I think that one of the themes is the law enforcement / bureaucratic kind of, Hans, like you said, is counting on the FBI to run their normal playbook to get the electricity turned off. They're able to first turn the 911 fire alarm back. You've got Bruce Willis dealing with the 911 operator. She's like, sir, this is an emergency line. He's like, what do you think I'm trying to do? Order a pizza?
Yeah, I think what that's about is the authorities are portrayed as either inept or just not part of the situation, or not part of the solution. And that also, I think, relates to the story of Jesus, where it's really the Jewish council or Jewish priests who want Jesus dead. The Roman authorities, they're kind of just there, and they do the crucifixion for the Jewish leaders. And so this, I think what this means is that the authors of both stories, Jesus in the Bible and Die Hard, are saying this is a conflict and a resolution that's going on among these people in this particular setting, this location. The Nakatomi Plaza is shut down; it's gated, and so everyone in the building is kind of trapped in that environment, and it's really just a battle between Hans and McClane. Like the story of Jesus was just Jesus versus the Jewish leaders.
Yeah, that's part of what's going on. You've also got that LA police captain who was trying to, tell McClane he was going to face charges for broken glass and stuff. And that's John, to your point, John actually says, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Now quit being part of the problem and put the other guy back on.
Exactly. They're kind of just like bumbling around outside. They can't even get inside with their big RV machine. And it's like, it's really not about the authorities, but I think the writers had to involve the authorities in some way, because it's not like believable that all this shooting and mayhem would take place and the authorities wouldn't find out.
Right. And that Hans was counting on their involvement to hear him tell it.
Exactly.
I just think that, that whole scene of sending the cops to the front door and blowing up the police tank. I mean, it almost had a sense of the Taggart train disaster. It was just due to these bad decisions of the bureaucracy.
Yeah, I didn't look into this aspect as much, but you could be right. Maybe another theme is the like ineffectiveness of the authorities. Um, just that they aren't really fixing the problem, or they're not capable of solving, crime and things like that.
Well, and just the tactics of Hans to, like we said earlier, use the FBI's playbook against them to say, okay, well, we need the power cut. We'll create a terrorist incident, and these guys will cut the power for us.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how both Hans and McLean are portrayed as very smart and they know a lot. McLean is always trying to get information. They make a big thing about how he has to learn the names of the terrorists, and he's writing their names on his hand, and he's trying to gather information.
He's
And then
repeatedly telling
Hans,
himself to think.
right, he actually does that. He says, "Think, John, think." um, so he's always self-critical. He's criticizing himself. He's in the moment. He's adjusting his plan and trying to figure out what went wrong. And Hans is doing the same thing. So it's like a battle of wits. It's not only a physical battle on there, it's a battle of wits. And I think that is portrayed in all the details as well, if you look at them.
Yeah, I think that definitely is going on. One thing, this is kind of a side note, but bearer bonds is a plot device. I used to be in the securities business, and they stopped being issued in the early 80s, but if they were like 20-year bonds, they all didn't mature until well after Die Hard was made. And I think, it was in like a Heart to Heart episode. It was just like a common plot device because basically whoever holds the bonds and has the coupon, there's no signature needed. And so it makes it like this thing that can be held that's you'd hold in big amounts. It's almost like cash. And,
Well, that's interesting because that reminds me of another theme, the theme of power. So if you hold the bearer bonds, you have the power. And there's also the idea of power is drawn out in other elements of the plot, such as literally the authorities shutting off the power to the building, which Hans wanted so that he could open the vault. And then there's this idea of who holds power over the guns and all the aspects of the building, the detonators. John gets the detonators, so he has the power, and then Hans gets them back, and then he has the power. So there's all this shifting of the power, and I think that's a theme.
yes.
That yeah, like even the people, John and Hans, they have the power in the building and the authorities can't do anything with it. The authorities you think would have the power, but they don't. So
I
think
was even
that's
thinking as part of his part of Hans's misdirect when he's demanding those left-wing hostages get released. He says the State Department is used to rattling its saber for its own ends. Now it can rattle it for mine.
right. And when he talks to them, he says, "You will be witness to the real use of power." So
That's good stuff. Yeah.
one thing I forgot to mention about John McClane being a Christ figure is there's actually a scene where he's kicked against a cross. So if you look during the fight that McClane has with Carl, Carl kicks him into this wooden board setup that is a cross, and there's actually two of them right beside each other.
I did see that after you pointed it out to me.
Yeah, and it's pretty obvious once you see it. And then I noticed a second example of a kind of cross when Hans shoots Takagi in the office. His blood and brains splatter against the door to the office, and the door has wooden frames in the shape of a cross. So it's kind of weird. I haven't quite thought too much about that, why Takagi is, being represented as maybe just a sacrifice. Takagi's sacrificing himself for the corporation or something like that.
Yeah, I guess. I'm not completely sure why he didn't give the codes or at least at least say you're gonna have to kill me.
Yeah, yeah. And that one's less obvious. You kind of have to look at it, and it kind of looks like it's an upside down cross the way they framed it. But if in the wider shots, you can see it's just like a normal door frame.
Right. I also think the character of Cleo is kind of a you the tech guru can be kind of good or evil, but it's again like a more almost like a plot device to just have someone that knows exactly what's going on everywhere and can give them the intel they need to, launch rockets at a police cruiser.
Well, it's Theo, and Theo, of
Thank
course,
you.
is a Greek name for God's gift or God. So he's literally in the movie, he's like the overseer. He sees everything that's going on. He says, "'Twas the night before Christmas, and nothing was scurrying through the house except for the four police officers in 2-by-2 formation." So he's like, he's the one who watches over everything in the building and monitors everything. He's the one who can break the codes.
Right.
So he's got the secret knowledge. Yeah, Theo is definitely an interesting character. Another interesting character, which I still haven't puzzled out, is Uli, which is the Chinese guy in Han's mob or Han's group.
The one that grabs the
And
candy.
yeah, the one who steals the candy. And I was thinking, what the heck is going on with him? Because everybody in Hans's group except for Theo is kind of white or European, and they make a point of that in the movie, is that it's mostly Europeans, but except for this guy, Yuli, and he doesn't have a big role. And so I was wondering, why is he in it? So, like, what's his purpose in the group? And I think if you dig into the details and you have this idea that it's all a coded message, I think he had something to do with knowing that there was these bearer bonds in the vault. I think that he probably gave some information to Hans, or he knew something. And I think one of the clues to this is that when Hans's group first drives up to the building, they're driving a truck that has Pacific Courier on it. And I think maybe someone in Hans's group had access to that truck, obviously, and that truck maybe delivered the bearer bonds or delivers bearer bonds to the Nakatomi Plaza.
That's
So
an
that's
interesting
maybe
theory. I think the movie originally was adapted from a book. And so, I mean, some of this may be able to be confirmed. I mean, your theories as a standalone movie are interesting symbolism, but there may, it may be that he had a bigger role and his scenes were cut.
Yeah, and another clue is that he steals the candy, but he doesn't just take it. Like Hans might do. He's like, I want some candy. I'll just take it out. He looks around, like he doesn't want it. He doesn't want to be seen taking it. Yet he's holding the building hostage. So it's like, why is he sneaking or looking around trying to sneak some candy without anyone seeing him? And I think that that's a point to his character. Like, he's this sneaky guy, and he's gonna like do things that you don't know he did. And so I think that's a clue that even though we didn't see this part of the movie, I think he was the one who told Hans about the bearer bonds. Oh, and
I
another
think
thing
you've
is,
got some fan fiction in you.
well, and then let me give you another piece of evidence, because of course, I've obsessed about this. So his name is actually a German name. I guess it's short for Ulrich or Ulrich, and it means powerful. When I wrote this down, it means rich, noble heritage, power, prosperity. So I think he's got the power. Like he's the one. He's the original power source. He's the one who gave Hans the knowledge he needed.
I didn't realize we were going to be getting this level of movie depth into speculation about the hidden scenes and stuff.
I told you I'm obsessed with this movie now.
Well, that's good. Any other last points you want to bring up about it?
Well, another important thing is the building itself. So the movie is not just about the people. I think even the plot itself has a duality because, like I said, I think it's a code, but it's also a story. It's a story about these people. But the building is interesting. The Nakatomi Plaza, I think, is supposed to be like this medium between heaven and hell. It's where this battle between like Jesus and Satan takes place. And I think that's because in Japanese, Nakatomi is this old ancient name that means like the realm where the spirits do battle or something like that. So if you look into the names Nakatomi and Takagi, I think you also see that the building itself is supposed to represent some like epic, like spiritual type battle. And you notice that both the lower floor gets blown up and the roof. So I think that's saying that they're blowing up heaven and hell, and the middle, because that's what matters.
Whoa.
But that's another whole podcast probably.
Yeah, geez. Well, that's fascinating. That's great. Well, we'll have to do more movies next year just to, get some more of your analysis. But
I recommend Fat Man. That's another movie I've been obsessing over. So yeah, we should do it. We should do this again.
All right. We'll see. We'll have a discussion on which movies, but but I do again want to wish you and all of our listeners happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, or whatever you celebrate. This has been another great year for the Ayn Rand Fan Club. William, any final thoughts?
No, just happy Hanukkah. I know you come from a Jewish background, so happy Hanukkah to you and your family. And I hope you have a great new year.
I appreciate it. And we look forward to doing more episodes next year. This is Scott Schiff along with William Swig. We will see you next time.